first baseman. To be honest, they didn't seemingly trust Ed Kranepool, and I know he and Gil Hodges didn't have the greatest relationship while they were playing. But they wanted someone who could really hit the ball. And Don Clendenin had a situation where he was drafted by the Expos, and he did. And the Don Clendenin biography is actually probably one of the ones I learned the most about him, about any player, written by Ed Hoyt. And it ended up that the Mets got him from the Expos June the 15th, which used to be the old trading deadline. And he came to the Mets and just brought a veteran's presence, even though he had not played in the postseason previously with the Pirates. He was really the, besides being a slugger, he was a real leader on the team. And one of the things that's also interesting to know is that despite him being a slugger and the Mets not having any sluggers, he didn't play every day. Ed Kranepool still played against right-handed pitchers. But Clendenin played occasionally against righties, but he mostly played against lefties. He didn't play at all in the championship series, which is hard to believe because they threw all right-handed pitchers, the Braves did. And fortunately for the Mets, the Orioles had a lot of lefties, and he hit 3 home runs in the World Series and got the MVP, although I still say Jerry Koosman, who was good enough to write the foreword for the book, in my mind still the MVP of that World Series, but you couldn't have won it without somebody scoring some runs. They scored just enough to knock off the Orioles. And
yeah. Did any of the contributors talk about the Koosman game, the Seaver going down in the first game? Did any players make any comments or describe what the mood was in the Mets locker room after that first game?
Well, funny you say Don Clendenin, who is dead, had kind of took the team aside, or before the newspaperman came in, and said, and it also said to Seaver, it's like, don't worry, we'll get them. They're not as good as they think, and I don't know how much that really pushed them ahead, but they'd been doing it all this year when no one thought they could do it, and it's only one game out of potentially 7, and they never lost again.
Another thing about illustrations in The Miracle Has Landed, there are some Topps images.
Yes, the Topps people were very nice to let us use that, and Jason Fry, who's with Greg Prince, does the Faith and Fear in Flushing website, has a collection of every Met card ever, and he let me use and the book use all those images. So we have them. I think we have 45 images or so, and because it's a volunteer effort, we didn't have a very big budget. So fortunately, the nice people at Topps and the Sporting News got together in 1969 and put together a bunch of baseball cards that had Tommy Agee's catch, and they had a lot of the great moments from the postseason, which we never would have been able to afford to put in the book. But it was great, and besides having illustrations for every player, because we tried very hard and worked with the Hall of Fame and a bunch of private collectors to let us use their images, but there was a lot of people we just couldn't get photographs for. But the baseball cards gave us an image for everybody, including the Jesse Hudsons and a couple of other guys who really were hardly on the team at all. A couple of them, we have their cards from other teams because they played so little with the Mets. They ended up never getting cards for the Mets.
You mentioned Jesse Hudson and Cup of Coffee players, but the '69 Mets truly were a platoon team compared to.
Yes, we have. There's a whole article just about the platoon. That was another thing I looked at. I looked at all the lineups because you would just think, okay, against lefties he did this, and against righties he did that, which he did, especially as the season went on. But early on in the season they had some injuries, and Cleon Jones actually began the year playing first base, and he kind of mixed and matched it around a lot. Art Shamsky started the year on the disabled list, and Rod Gaspar, who was a scrub to think to come up with the most inarticulate word he can for it, but wasn't really considered any kind of a prospect. He had a great camp, and next thing you know, he's starting in right field on opening day, and I think played the first 10 or so games as a starter out in right field till Shamsky came back. And he was a switch hitter, but he mixed everyone around. I found, Bud Harrelson, I just assumed he batted one spot, but he batted second against lefties and eighth against righties, and mixed everyone around in the lineup. It was very interesting to see how he did it, and he was very faithful. Like I said, at the end of the year, you'd think you'd want Don Clendenin, being your first baseman in the playoffs, and he didn't play at all.
Wow. It was what was the thrust as to why Hodges was moving? You want to speculate as to why he was
Well, his
moving
team
around?
wasn't that good. I mean, you look at the team on paper. Nowadays it would be hard to even, with the numbers they have, it's hard to imagine that many of the guys sticking in the major leagues for even that long. I mean, it was a different time. They just come off the year of the pitcher, and I don't want to sell any of them short. I mean, they have far more ability to play than just about anybody I've ever known. But on the major league level, they weren't, stunning players, and some of them had deficiencies. And Gil Hodges, is probably his greatest attribute, knew how to get the most out of the players. He looked at Tug McGraw, who was still a little immature, was coming along, but he'd worked on a screwball, and he was a starting pitcher for most of his career. He said, I think for you to really get to the next level, and for us to get to the next level, we need to move you to the bullpen. And after Jerry Koosman got hurt early in the year, after Koosman came back, McGraw went to the bullpen for good. I don't know that he, other than a few games here and there for the rest of his career, was a relief pitcher.
Since this is the first time I'm getting to see The Miracle Has Landed, is there anything written by a fan about that season?
It's a good thing you mentioned that, because we actually have a whole section in the back. I did earlier you had me on the show when we did Cubs by the Numbers, and one of the writers from that, Al Yellen, who does Bleed Cubby Blue, I asked him, and he kept putting it off because it's kind of it's become a one-way rivalry where to the Mets are like, the Cubs, we ended up beating them. But the Mets are still loathed. They still hate everything about it. Ron Santo will even, spit when he says the name Mets. And I after several months of cajoling him, got him to put something in, and he did a great job. He was a 13-year-old and actually ended up going to the game that was kind of the beginning of the end, just before the Cubs came to New York to play the Mets for the series with the Black Cat. The Cubs are up by a couple runs in the ninth inning, and Willie Stargell hits a ball onto Sheffield Avenue at Wrigley, and he said you could hear a pin drop at Wrigley, and that was his birthday game that his dad took him to, and it all went downhill from there. The Mets won the next two games, took over first place, and that was a great one. And we also had one by Glenn Vassy, who was an Orioles fan, and writes about. But his story is really about Jerry Koosman and his 2-1 game that got the Mets going in the World Series after the game we discussed earlier where Seaver lost. And that gives an Orioles fan's perspective, which was nice to get in, because Mets fans can certainly understand what it's like to be on the end of a hard luck decision, and I thought that brought a little something to the table, as well as one of my favorite stories, and we'd also used it in a previous book, was Lou Longobardi, who was driving to Shea Stadium to get tickets for opening day the following year in 1970, and found something in the parking lot. And he picked it up, and it was a number, the number 3, and he realized that it was the number from the wall in right field that had been torn off during the celebration, and it had just been sitting there all winter long. And he still has it, and has brought it around and met all the 1969 Mets, had them sign it, and it's been kind of a holy grail for him to get every living 69 Met on there. And because of the celebration this year, he was able to get everybody on there, and that was kind of a fun one. And just talking about seeing the Mets' eyes light up, because those guys have signed everything over the years, and but they've never signed a piece of plywood that's 40 years old that they all know instantly what it is.
Wow. Just out of curiosity, the Miracle Has Landed. They shocked the baseball world. Who was the preseason picks to end up in the Fall Classic?
Well, and we have a little a spring training piece in there as well, and the Times and a couple of other papers sort of poo-pooed them. They said they did say that they thought the Mets would be better.